Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for this huge opportunity for me to talk about this question of food security in the context of climate resilience. And I'm going to emphasize the role of what I call agri-food economics, that is the name of my division at FAO, but really this how economic science in the context of agri-food system can be used to bring the world in the right direction, because unfortunately, even if some progress have been achieved, in particular on some climate target, actually in terms of food security, the last decade was not great, to say the least. And we know what to do, and I think on the climate side, for the last 50 years, actually science is very clear. If you go back to the testimony of Professor Sagan in front of the US Congress, all the elements are there, including the challenge of the future, but we didn't act, or at least the society didn't act properly. So the question is really about what are the incentives in order to move in the right direction? Because we cannot force people to do things, even in the most strong regimes. So we have to understand it. And why economic science is pretty relevant is when you start your 101 course in economic science, people will say, okay, it's about using scarce resources. We want to have an optimal use of scarce resources. There is no free lunch in this world, and we have to deal with trade-off and synergies, as we already have seen a perfect example in the previous speakers. But also, it's about shaping incentives. That's really key in modern economic science. And we also have to deal with two issues that are efficiency and equity. How big is the cake and how we are going to split it? And the reality is that we cannot consider these two questions separated. And that's some of the big challenges we face today across nations, across generations. And in this context, we have to deal with it. And in addition to the natural science, where yes, we need quantities to balance, we need to make sure that we have enough water, we have enough land. We are not in a world where we have a central planner that is omnipotent, omniscient, and benevolent, and that is going to do this allocation. What we have is prices that guide us, and we can have these policies shaping these prices. But markets are imperfect, and policies are imperfect. So we need really to do good design in order to go where we want to go, and that requires data, science, and model, because all brains are limited, at least my brain is limited. So at one point, I need computers and equations to replace my limitation. And through that, we can deal with synergies and trade-offs. So that's why economic matters. I'm an economist, as you can guess now. But why agri-food? And we just don't want to talk about food, because of course, food is critical. No food, no life. No food, no GDP. Sometimes people say, what is the share of agriculture in total GDP? In terms of direct contribution, it's less than 10% globally. In terms of actual contribution, it's 100% until we are all replaced by machine. But we use water and land not just for food. We use it to produce a number of agricultural and forestry goods. At the same time, agri-food system represent 1/3 of the man-made emission. And here, we just don't want to blame agri-food system per se, because in this 1/3, 1/4 come from our energy sectors. It's not something that is disconnected, it's something that is integrated. We don't want to double count. But at the same time, all pathways that will lead to decarbonization in the energy sector give a role to agriculture and land use. We want to produce renewable energy, bioenergy, but actually decarbonizing our economies, phasing out fossil fuel, don't mean we phase out for carbon. We stop using carbon for fossil fuel, and we will need carbon from biomass to build houses, vegetables, to replace plastics, and so on. And that's the fourth industrial revolution that the bioeconomy, and I'm not going to talk more about it because we have people much more qualified than me in the room to talk about. Our agri-food system also at the core of the society, and this is this overlap between the economic system, the political system, the environmental ecosystem. Food has a cultural value. Of course, also a religious value, but just an economic value. Farmers need to make profit. They stop making profit, they stop to produce, we all disappear. Similarly, when we say that they have to produce in a cleaner way, They have now to deliver more than just feeding us, but feeding us in a sustainable way. They need to be paid for. We cannot shift the cost on them, because also most farmers in the world are not the richest people in the world. In all society, actually, farmers work a lot for a very relatively low income. So we should also not start to put an unmanageable pressure on them. And our agri-food system also interact with energy system, and the question of bioenergy is one of it. The question of which energy we use to cook is another one, but also the health systems. Bad food mean bad nutrition, mean bad health. Now, there are similarities between these systems, but also significant differences. Agri-food systems are much more complicated. The level of heterogeneity about what type of technology we can use to produce wheat, just wheat, already exceeds the number of technology we have to produce energy. The scale of production also varies. You have very large-scale producers and very small ones. And even if it's of public interest, producing food is mainly a private sector activities. You go in any small village, you will see a market where smallholders try to sell their food up to the global traders. Health systems are still dominated by the public sector. So how we shape these systems based on their complexity, their richness, and the fact that it's still a private-driven activity, it's important. But at the same time, this agri-food system is one of the most unique situations to deliver, for example, both on mitigation and adaptation on the same time. If you look other part of the economy, it's in many cases mitigation project, we decarbonize, but you know, the adaptation space for a nuclear plant is not huge. When we farm, if you increase the carbon content in soil, you do mitigation, you do adaptation. Same thing when you start to use seaweed to feed your cattle. You contribute to mitigation, you contribute to adaptation. So we have a lot of options. Now, why food security and actually food insecurity is an issue, there is a moral imperative. We have a right to food that is recognized. The human rights approach was already reminded by my other colleagues, very well surrounded. It's also an efficiency issue. I mean, if you don't care about ethics, if you don't care about morale, if you just care about economic growth, without good food, you don't have a healthy population today, but also tomorrow, because we need to grow human capital, and we know how much malnutrition has a cost for future generations. And the future is about more complex situation, more technology. Even farming tomorrow is much more complicated than farming yesterday. And so human capital is key in terms of economic growth. And if we don't have economic growth, we cannot have a big cake to share, and we don't have the resources to adapt. You know, I think that when you are poor, that you are not really resilient because you don't have this capacity. We already discussed this today. So, you know, growth is important. Malnutrition has a huge cost, like 3.5 trillion a year just for child malnutrition. Our agri-food system also have a lot hidden costs. It's more than 10 trillion a year, between 10 and 20 trillions. We have uncertainty because it's complicated, but it's big. So again, it's more than 10% of our global GDP that is lost in hidden costs. Malnutrition, including overnutrition, put also a pressure on our health system, and we know that they produce carbon and they are costly. And last but not least today, also people realize that when we have malnutrition, when we have overweight, obesity, you can have a security problem. In the US, the most recent assessment showed that 1/3 of the young population is too heavy to serve in the military. So fixing agri-food system contribute to many objectives, from the more ethical and moral one to the more practical one. And at the same time, lack of food security means lack of political stability. So just to tell you that first, hunger has been on the rise for the last 15 years. So you know, when we say, oh, we need to prepare to climate change, you have already people that are hungry, 735 million today. So it's 120 million more than before COVID. And conflict, climate shocks, and economic slowdown are pushing numbers high, but the main cause is still inequalities. And on the right-hand side of my graphs, you will see, in particular, the green light is, the blue line is how much calorie per capita we produce. So at the world level for food use, not even thinking about the leakage, just for food. Every year we produce more food per capita, but still hunger is on the rise. So that's why, beyond the global situation and beyond the fact that our agri-food system as a block deliver more food on the plate every year, we still not share it in an optimal way. And the question of inequalities is critical. Here you see a snapshot of the level of food insecurity of the world. So basically you have more 2 billion people that are food insecure, 735 million people chronically hunger, 2 billion people food insecure. That's 68% of the population in Africa, but also 8% in high-income countries, and the situation has deteriorated over the year, but still a contrasted situation. Now, just to give you also how in 20 years the world may change on some aspect, and here I show you the evolution of LDC's countries and the European Union. LDC's countries is basically 1/3 of the people that are hungry today, so it's 245 million people. 20 years ago, they represented 10% of the population. Today, they represent 14% of the global population. So that's their share in the population. The European Union, at the same time, has shrunk. And they moved from 7%, broadly speaking, to 5.6%. Now, if you look at the share in agricultural production, the same LDC that represents 40% of the population just produce 4% of the global food production. The European Union has seen a share that has decreased over time, so we have to think how different players play a different role at different years over time. And now you see that the European Union produces more food in terms of share than its population. But the last part is what I want to raise, because when we talk about emission, and emission in agri-food sector is very different than other emissions. The LDCs represent today 15.4% of global emission in agri-food system. The European Union, 7.17%. So if you compare this to the share of production, you see that Europe is pretty efficient. The carbon footprint of European agri-food system is not the problem. The problem is a lack of efficiency in low-income countries. And it's not because we don't have the good soil or the good water, it's because we don't have the money to invest. They don't have the access to the technology, and they are lagging behind, and it has a cost for them, high level of hunger. It has a cost for the world because they emit too much compared to what they should if they have access. So addressing this unfairness is at the same time good for everyone, especially if you think that we have one planet, we have one total carbon stock. The goal is not to get the best student becoming a bit better, is to make sure that the people that we have left behind join the efficiency. So, as you see, as I've said, the situation is complicated. We have some challenges, but actually climate change is going to make things worse. So it's impacting the way we produce food in terms of water, land, quality and quantity, but also workers. Sometimes we forget about the farmers. A drought-resistant seed is a great news. But in many places in 15 years already, it will be too hot and too humid for farmers to work most of the day. So you can give them nice drought-resistant seed. In Europe or in the US, they will have an air-conditioned tractor, so they will manage. In many places in Africa, they will not. So we have to think about this impact of climate change on all the aspects of the production side, including in terms of how it accelerates the depreciation of your knowledge and of our capital. It has also impact on the demand side. We see that when basically you have more carbon in the atmosphere, your crops grow at a faster rate, you have more biomass, but less nutrient density. So our capacity to absorb nutrients will also be impacted. And here, there is growing research on this nexus between psychological distress, climate anxiety, but also food habits. And that's not just, in high-income countries. You go to the seeds, you go to the Pacific Island, and you see this reality today. High level of obesity, high level of climate distress, and a vicious circle that has started. And of course, higher climate change means more food loss and waste. The more the world is hot and humid, the more it becomes complicated to protect and conserve food. So a lot of the problem we have today will accelerate, including in terms of inequalities across generations, across countries, within countries, between rural and urban areas. But even in the same rural areas, we see that already climate shock impact more women than men, poor than rich. So not doing a thing means more inequality. The full set of policies and where we spend money today is not aligned with what we need. and we are not spending enough actually in the agri-food system. Even if you hear that, oh, the world is spending billions, actually 500 billions on farm subsidies, the total share of agricultural spending at the world level coming from public budget, in total public budget, is 4%. So it's not even the share in GDP or the share in expenditure. So we under publicly and privately invest in these sectors. Only 4% of the climate finance go to agriculture and land use. And I will say, last but not least, the international aid that we provide for food security and nutrition is not enough. And when we have seen increase in the recent years, is go only to emergency activity. So we are trying to solve the problem when it's already there, and it becomes worse and worse. So we spend more and more in terms of trying to stop the fire in the house and not in terms of trying to avoid to get a fire at some place. So it's not sustainable. We have a number of things that can get worse. Here you will see a lot of elements on the slide that explain why when we don't design solution properly, or where we just think, oh, we just have to do that. But the question is not what we have to do, is how. And there's a lot of things that make the story more complicated in terms of non-linearity, in terms of political economy, in terms of leakage effect across borders. Something that economists would like to talk about is the Jevon paradox. We have problem of discount rate, and we need to factor all of this in a good way. And when we mess up things, we have bad solutions that are implemented at scale, like we have seen in the biofuel, money spent on crop insurance that try to reinforce the wrong specialization, or carbon credits and carbon market that have not been designed initially properly to land use and smallholders and end up in wasting resources. We need to build resilience. What I'm just going to conclude on, sorry, but a lot of things we like to communicate. The future still means that even if we say in SDG 2 we are going to eradicate hunger, based on the last projection we do with model, we still have 600 million people in 2030 that will be in chronic hunger, and much more in food insecurity. So in December, we tried to bring together these different messages at FAO, where we try to bring basically science for action. That's really what we want to do with achieving SDG 2 without bridging the 1.5 target. So still saying, you know, we want to deliver on food security and nutrition. That's what people care on a daily basis. But without climate action, we will not be able to do it and to continue to do it. So it's not one or the other. Both have to be integrated, but I will say people first. And that's this question of just transition and improve efficiency and global rebalancing that will have to be tackled front and center. Without dealing with inequalities within and across countries, we miss the target. You will see more information, but at the end, and through integrating both biophysical and economic modeling, we show that there is still a pathway to reduce the carbon footprint and actually making our agri-food system carbon sink by 2050, and providing good food for all today and tomorrow, meaning that making sure that hunger disappears, making sure that everyone can afford healthy diet, but also that everyone wants healthy diet. Because it's only when we will see this, then the world will change. Thank you.